Meet Max, an 8-year-old boy with a strong sense of right and wrong. Max and his father, Lucas, share a close bond built on trust and love. But one day, everything changes when Max discovers a shocking secret about someone close to their family. With danger looming over his father, Max finds himself faced with a difficult decision. Despite his fears, Max knows he must act to protect the person he loves most. What is the dark secret that Max uncovers? How does this young boy's courage lead to unexpected consequences? And how will it change their lives forever? Stay tuned to find out. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from today. If stories of bravery and honesty resonate with you, be sure to like, share, and hit that subscribe button for more heartwarming stories like this one. The morning sun poured through the stained glass windows of the small chapel, casting colorful patterns on the wooden pews. The air was filled with excitement as guests chatted among themselves, eager to witness the special moment. It was a warm, cheerful Saturday in early June, the perfect day for a wedding. At the front of the chapel stood Lucas Johnson, a man in his mid-30s wearing a classic black tuxedo. His blue eyes sparkled with happiness as he waited for his bride, Clara, to arrive. It was clear that Lucas was excited for this new chapter in his life. After losing his wife 2 years earlier, he had struggled with grief. Meeting Clara felt like a fresh start, a chance to build a new family with his son, Max. Max, however, was not feeling the same excitement. Dressed in a small suit that matched his father's, Max stood beside Lucas, holding a small white pillow that carried 2 gold rings. The 8-year-old boy's curly brown hair was neatly combed, but his eyes told a different story. They were filled with worry rather than joy. "Hey, Dad," Max whispered, tugging at Lucas's sleeve. "Are you sure about this?" Lucas glanced down at Max, giving him a warm smile. He knelt beside him, resting a hand on Max's shoulder. "I know this is a big change, buddy," Lucas said gently, "but Clara makes me happy. I really believe she can make us both happy too." Max bit his lip, unsure of how to respond. He wanted to believe his dad, but he had seen a different side of Clara that his father hadn't. Max tried to force a smile and nodded, but inside, he felt uneasy. As the music began to play, signaling the start of the ceremony, Lucas stood up and straightened his jacket. "Thank you for being here with me, Max," Lucas whispered. "You're the best ring bearer a dad could ask for." Max nodded again, but his mind was racing. He looked around the chapel and saw familiar faces, his grandparents, aunts, uncles, and a few of his friends from school. Everyone seemed happy, smiling and whispering to each other. But Max felt a heaviness in his chest. He knew he was the only one who felt like something was terribly wrong. The music grew louder, and all eyes turned toward the entrance. The double doors at the back of the chapel slowly opened, revealing Clara in a flowing white gown. She was beautiful, with her long blonde hair cascading in waves down her back, and her bright blue eyes shimmering as she walked down the aisle. The guests gasped softly, admiring her beauty. Lucas's face lit up with pure joy, his eyes following Clara's every step. But Max's gaze remained fixed on his father. He wasn't looking at Clara. He couldn't. Deep inside, Max knew he had to say something. He had to tell his dad the truth, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. He clutched the ring pillow tighter, his knuckles turning white. As Clara reached the altar, she smiled at Lucas, her eyes soft and full of promise. "You look beautiful," Lucas whispered, his voice filled with love. "Thank you," Clara replied softly. "I can't wait to start our life together." The officiant began the ceremony, his deep voice resonating through the chapel. The guests listened intently, their attention focused on Lucas and Clara. But for Max, each passing moment felt like an eternity. He shifted nervously from foot to foot, trying to gather the courage to speak up. His small frame trembled as he recalled the strange conversations he had overheard between Clara and a man named Mark, the harsh words she had used when his father wasn't around, and the look of anger on her face when she thought no one was watching. Max's mind drifted back to when he first met Clara. It had been a sunny afternoon in early spring. Lucas had picked him up from school, looking more excited than Max had seen in a long time. "I've got someone special I want you to meet, Max," he had said, practically beaming as they drove home. When they arrived, Clara was waiting on the front porch, smiling warmly. "Hi, Max," she had said, bending down to his level. "Your dad talks about you all the time." Max had wanted to believe her kindness was genuine, but as weeks turned into months, he noticed changes. When Lucas was home, Clara was sweet, laughing at Max's jokes and ruffling his hair. But when Lucas wasn't around, Clara's smiles disappeared. She became cold, distant, and sometimes even harsh. Max remembered one evening when Lucas was working late, and Clara was supposed to make dinner for him. "Do you like space?" Max had asked, trying to break the silence. "We're learning about the solar system in school," Clara had barely looked up from her phone. "I'm busy," she snapped. "Eat your dinner quietly." Max had felt a lump form in his throat, and he shrank back into his chair, feeling smaller than ever. That was just one of many moments that had made Max feel unwelcome. He tried to tell his dad, but Lucas, caught up in his love for Clara, often dismissed Max's concerns as jealousy or a phase. Now, standing in the chapel, Max felt a surge of desperation. He couldn't let his father make a mistake that could ruin their lives. The officiant continued with the ceremony, getting closer to the crucial moment. "If anyone has a reason why these two should not be married, speak now or forever hold your peace," he said. Max's heart pounded in his chest. He looked at Lucas, who was smiling warmly at Clara. This was his chance, his only chance. He took a deep breath and shouted, "Wait!" The chapel fell silent, all eyes now on Max. Lucas turned to his son, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "Max, what's going on?" he asked gently. Tears welled up in Max's eyes as he tried to steady his voice. "Dad, you can't marry her," he said, his voice cracking. "She's not who you think she is." Lucas's face turned serious. He knelt down beside Max, putting a hand on his shoulder. "What do you mean, Max?" Max felt a wave of relief, but also fear. "I heard her talking to someone named Mark," he whispered. "She's planning something bad, Dad." Clara's face paled, her eyes widening in shock. "Max, that's enough," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You don't understand." But Max refused to back down. "I'm telling the truth," he insisted. "Please, Dad, you have to believe me." Lucas's eyes darted between Max and Clara, unsure of what to think. The guests whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of what was happening. Lucas, however, kept his focus on Max. "Are you sure about this, Max?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Max nodded. "I am, Dad. I just want you to be safe." Lucas turned to Clara, his face filled with doubt. "Is there any truth to what Max is saying?" Clara's expression hardened. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "He's just a jealous child." But Lucas didn't look convinced. His face was filled with a mix of confusion, hurt, and uncertainty. Max, seeing the struggle in his father's eyes, felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he had finally gotten through. Lucas felt the weight of Max's words pressing down on him. He looked at Clara, torn between doubt and disbelief. Could Max really be right? Clara's eyes flashed with anger as she tried to regain control of the situation. "Lucas," she said softly, "we've talked about this. Max is having a tough time adjusting and is just trying to protect you." Lucas hesitated, but Max's face showed nothing but honesty and determination. "Dad, please," Max pleaded, his eyes shining with tears. "I heard her talking about an insurance policy and hurting you. I'm not making this up." The room fell silent as guests whispered among themselves, unsure of what they were witnessing. A few stood up, uncertain whether to stay or leave. Lucas rose slowly, trying to process what was happening. "Clara," he asked, his voice shaking, "is there something you're not telling me?" Clara's expression hardened. "This is absurd," she snapped. "He's just a jealous child." But Lucas remained focused on Max, sensing that his son wasn't lying. "Max, tell me everything you've heard." Max took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I heard Clara talking on the phone late at night, Dad. She was talking to someone named Mark about insurance money. She said they'd get money after you were gone." Lucas's face paled as he tried to grasp Max's words. Clara, realizing Lucas's growing distrust, tried to interrupt, but Max continued. "I've also seen documents on her computer about an insurance policy with your name on it." Lucas turned to Clara, his voice filled with disbelief. "Is this true, Clara? Do you have an insurance policy on me?" Clara's expression turned cold, and her facade began to crack. "I won't stand here and be humiliated," she said sharply before storming down the aisle, pushing past the stunned guests. Lucas watched her leave, his heart breaking as the truth started to sink in. He turned back to Max, who stood quietly, unsure of what would happen next. Lucas knelt down, placing a gentle hand on Max's shoulder. "You did the right thing, buddy," he said softly. "Thank you for being brave enough to tell me." Max, relieved but still fearful, whispered, "I just didn't want anything bad to happen to you, Dad." As Lucas and Max tried to regain their composure, a tall man in a dark suit entered the chapel. His eyes scanned the room before settling on Lucas and Max. "Mr. Johnson?" he asked, addressing Lucas. "Yes," Lucas replied, still holding Max's hand tightly. "Who are you?" The man pulled out a badge. "I'm Detective Ramirez," he introduced himself. "I was just about to step outside when I heard what was going on. I was actually hoping to speak with you about Clara. Lucas was stunned. Why would you want to talk about Clara? Detective Ramirez's face was grim. I've been investigating Clara, whose real name is Sarah Collins. She's a known con artist with a history of targeting wealthy men. She changes her name often and has been involved in several scams, including insurance fraud. The room seemed to spin for Lucas as he tried to comprehend the detective's words. Max tightened his grip on Lucas's hand, feeling frightened but validated. So, she really was lying? Max asked softly. Detective Ramirez nodded. Yes. We have evidence that Sarah was planning an accident during your honeymoon to collect on a large insurance policy she recently set up. Lucas felt weak, steadying himself against the altar. I trusted her, he murmured, his voice cracking. I thought she cared about us. Max looked up at his father, filled with concern. I didn't want to ruin your happiness, Dad, he said, but I was scared for you. Lucas hugged Max tightly. I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner, he said, but we'll figure this out together. Detective Ramirez stepped closer, his tone sympathetic but firm. I know this is a lot to process, Mr. Johnson, but we need you to come to the station to give a full statement. Max will also need to share what he overheard. Lucas nodded, still processing the shock. Of course, he agreed. We'll do whatever we need to do. The detective placed a reassuring hand on Lucas's shoulder. We're going to make sure Sarah is brought to justice. Lucas looked down at Max, who was now leaning against him, exhausted. Are you okay, buddy? He asked softly. Max nodded. I just want to go home. Lucas promised, we will, but first we'll go to the station. As they walked down the aisle together, the once joyous chapel now felt cold, marked by betrayal. The ride to the police station was tense, with Lucas and Max both trying to process the recent events. Max sat close to Lucas, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief, while Lucas stared blankly out the window, still trying to wrap his head around the reality that Clara was a con artist. Dad, Max said quietly, breaking the silence. Did I do the right thing? Lucas turned to him, eyes filled with a mix of pain and gratitude. Yes, Max, he replied gently. You were brave, and you saved me from something terrible. Max's face relaxed a little, but his fear lingered. I was scared you wouldn't believe me. Lucas squeezed Max's hand. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, but from now on, I promise to always listen to you, no matter what. Max nodded, feeling more reassured. He leaned his head against Lucas's arm as they pulled up to the station. Inside, Detective Ramirez led them to a small, plain room. We need your statements, he explained. Take your time. Lucas sat down, pulling Max's chair closer to his. The detective began by asking Max to recount everything he had overheard and the suspicious interactions he had with Clara. Max took a deep breath and began. I heard Clara talking to someone named Mark about insurance money, he said. She sounded really angry, like something was going wrong. Lucas listened, heartbroken at how much Max had been keeping inside. I'm so sorry, Max, he whispered. Detective Ramirez nodded, taking notes. Did you hear anything else unusual? Max thought for a moment. She was planning something bad, and I saw papers about insurance with Dad's name on them. Lucas tried to hold back tears, feeling guilt for not protecting his son sooner. What happens now? He asked the detective. We'll continue the investigation and issue an arrest warrant for Sarah, Ramirez assured them. Our main priority is to find her before she tries this again. Lucas nodded slowly. We'll do whatever it takes. Once they finished their statements, they were free to leave. As they walked out, Lucas felt overwhelmed by everything that had happened. Are you okay, Max? He asked softly. Max nodded, though his face still showed signs of the emotional roller coaster. I just want to go home, Dad. Lucas put his arm around Max's shoulders as they left the station. We will, he promised. The drive home was quiet, both lost in thought. When they arrived home, the house felt different, more like a place of shadows than warmth. Lucas turned to Max. Are you hungry? Max shook his head. Not really. Can we just sit for a while? They sank into the living room couch. It felt like a place marked by betrayal, but it also represented a chance to start anew. I still can't believe it, Lucas said, breaking the silence. How could someone be so cruel? Max looked up. I don't know, Dad, but I'm glad she's gone. Lucas hugged Max tightly. Me too, buddy. The following days were filled with more meetings with the police and legal consultations. News of the wedding's shocking turn spread quickly, forcing Lucas to explain what had happened to friends and family repeatedly. Meanwhile, Max tried to return to his normal routine, but the lingering fear remained. One afternoon, as Max did his homework at the kitchen table, Lucas approached him. Max, there's something I need to tell you, he began. Max looked up, eyes filled with concern. What is it, Dad? The detective found more evidence about Clara's plan. She and Mark had been working together for years, Lucas explained. They targeted people like us before. Max's face showed a mix of relief and sadness. So it's really over? Lucas hesitated. Not completely, but we know the truth now, and that's the most important part. Max nodded, looking tired. I just want everything to be normal again. Lucas ruffled Max's hair. It will be, buddy. We'll make a new start. As days passed, Lucas and Max slowly adjusted to their new reality. They talked more openly, sharing their feelings and trying to support each other. Lucas made a point of spending more time with Max, playing games, going for walks, and having meaningful conversations at dinner. One evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lucas turned to Max. You know what, Max? He said. What, Dad? You're my hero, Lucas said sincerely. You saved me, and I'll never forget that. Max beamed. Thanks, Dad, but you're my hero too. Lucas's eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Max. The bond between father and son grew stronger each day, as they continued to heal and move forward together. A few weeks had passed since the disastrous wedding day. Lucas and Max were slowly adjusting to their new reality. Lucas tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Max, but the fear of Clara, now known as Sarah, lingered in their minds. One morning, as Max got ready for school, Lucas noticed his son's lingering worry. You okay, buddy? He asked gently. Max nodded, though his expression was serious. I know we're safe now, but what if she comes back? Lucas's heart ached. I understand, Max, but remember the police are doing everything they can to find her, and we've made our home as secure as possible. Max took a deep breath and managed a small smile. Okay, Dad, I trust you. Later that afternoon, Lucas received a call from Detective Ramirez. Mr. Johnson, we found something at Sarah's last known location, the detective said. It's a storage unit with documents that reveal more about her past and plans. Lucas felt a mix of relief and dread. What do you need from me? We'd like you to come to the station, Ramirez replied. Some of the information might be hard to hear, but it's important for the case. Lucas agreed, and soon found himself at the station, facing Detective Ramirez in a small meeting room. The detective opened a folder filled with photographs and documents. We discovered more about Sarah's background, he began. She has used multiple fake identities over the years, targeting men in similar ways. Lucas felt a wave of disgust. How could she do this to so many people? He asked quietly. Ramirez continued. She meticulously planned every detail with you, including a staged accident during your honeymoon. The insurance policy was indeed part of her plan. Lucas's face turned pale as the full extent of the betrayal sank in. I thought she cared about us, he murmured, struggling to process the information. The detective nodded sympathetically. These people are skilled manipulators. It's not your fault. Lucas felt a deep sense of guilt. Max tried to warn me, he admitted, but I didn't listen. Detective Ramirez reassured him. You're not the only one who's been fooled, Mr. Johnson. Sarah and Mark have been partners for years, working together to con their victims. Lucas stared at the photos of Mark and Sarah, anger bubbling up. What should I do now? Stay vigilant, Ramirez advised. We've set up extra patrols around your neighborhood, and a security system would be a wise investment. Lucas agreed. I'll do whatever it takes to protect Max. As he drove home, Lucas replayed the detective's words in his mind, feeling both anger and determination. He had let Sarah into their lives, but he was resolved to make sure Max would never feel unsafe again. When he arrived home, Max was sitting at the kitchen table doing his homework. He looked up as Lucas entered. How was it, Dad? Max asked. Lucas forced a smile. It was tough, but I learned a lot. The police think Sarah and Mark have been doing this for years, but the good news is, they think she's running away and won't come back here. Max looked relieved. I hope we never see her again. Lucas sat beside Max, placing a hand on his shoulder. We won't. We're safe, and I'm so proud of you for being brave. Max's eyes softened. Thanks, Dad. I just want everything to be normal. Lucas smiled. We're getting there, buddy. One day at a time. Over the following days, Lucas and Max started rebuilding their routine. They spent more time together, cooking, playing games, and even going for walks around the neighborhood. Each small step felt like progress. One afternoon, as they sat outside enjoying the sunset, Max asked, Do you think Sarah will ever get caught? Lucas thought for a moment. I hope so, Max. But even if she doesn't, we're stronger now. We've learned to protect ourselves. Max seemed reassured. I'm glad, Dad. I just want us to be okay. Lucas pulled Max into a hug. We are, Max, and we'll keep getting better. The days passed, bringing a sense of peace that had been missing for too long. Lucas focused on being more present for Max, attending his soccer games and helping with school projects. He wanted Max to feel loved and secure. One evening, as they watched a movie together, Max leaned against Lucas's side. Dad, he said softly, I think we're going to be okay. Lucas smiled, feeling a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. We are, Max. We really are. Life had slowly started to return to normal for Lucas and Max. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when Lucas found himself looking over his shoulder or checking the locks twice before bed. Max, too, was still wary, often peering out the window as if expecting Sarah to reappear. But each day they grew a little stronger, their bond a little deeper. One Saturday morning, Lucas decided it was time to do something special for Max. The past few months had been so stressful, and Lucas wanted to create a new, happy memory with his son. How about we spend the day together? Lucas suggested over breakfast. We could go to the park, have a picnic, and maybe even fly a kite. Max's eyes lit up at the idea. Really, Dad? He asked, his voice filled with excitement. Really? Lucas confirmed with a smile. It's just you and me today. Max grinned from ear to ear. I'd like that, he said. The weather was perfect as they drove to the nearby park, sunny with a light breeze. Lucas had packed sandwiches, fruit, and Max's favorite juice. They spread out a blanket under a large oak tree, with the sound of children playing and birds chirping in the background. Do you remember the last time we came here? Lucas asked, handing Max a sandwich. Max nodded as he took a bite. Yeah, it was a long time ago. Mom was with us. Lucas's heart tightened at the mention of Max's mother. It had been 2 years since she passed away, and Lucas knew the memory of her still weighed heavily on Max. She loved coming here, Lucas said softly. And she would be so proud of you, Max. Max's expression softened. I miss her, he admitted. I do too, Lucas replied, placing a comforting arm around Max's shoulders. But I'm glad we're here today, making new memories. After they finished eating, Lucas pulled a bright red kite from the picnic basket. Ready to fly this thing? He asked, trying to lift the mood. Max's eyes widened with excitement. Yeah! He shouted, jumping to his feet. They spent the next hour running back and forth across the field, laughing as the kite soared high into the sky. For the first time in a while, Lucas felt genuinely happy. He could see that Max was having fun too, his face beaming as he watched the kite dance in the wind. As the afternoon wore on, they found themselves lying on the blanket, staring up at the sky. I had a good time today, Dad, Max said, his voice filled with contentment. Lucas smiled. Me too, Max. We should do this more often. Max nodded. Yeah, we should. Later, as they drove home, Lucas felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. He glanced over at Max, who was gazing out the window with a thoughtful expression. What's on your mind, buddy? Lucas asked. Max hesitated before replying. Do you think we'll ever see Sarah again? Lucas's grip tightened on the steering wheel. It was a question he had been asking himself, too. I don't think so, he said honestly. The police are doing everything they can to find her, but she's good at hiding. Max seemed to take this in. I just want to feel safe, Dad, he admitted. Lucas's heart broke a little at his son's vulnerability. I know, Max, he said gently, and I promise you, we're going to be okay. We're safer now than ever before. Max nodded slowly, as if trying to convince himself to believe it. I trust you, Dad, he said softly. Hearing those words meant everything to Lucas. He had felt so much guilt for letting Sarah into their lives, but knowing that Max still trusted him was a step toward healing. As they pulled into the driveway, Max suddenly spoke up. Can we make spaghetti for dinner? You know, like we used to? Lucas smiled warmly. Of course, he agreed. Let's make it extra cheesy, just how you like it. They spent the evening cooking together, with Max insisting on stirring the sauce while Lucas boiled the pasta. It was a simple, familiar routine, but it brought a sense of comfort to both of them. Hey, Dad, Max said as they sat down to eat. Thanks for today. It was really fun. Lucas's eyes softened. I'm glad you enjoyed it, he replied. You deserve all the happiness in the world, Max. Max looked up, his eyes bright with gratitude. You do too, Dad. They clinked their glasses of juice, sharing a small but meaningful toast. It felt like a new beginning, one that was built on trust, honesty, and the lessons they had learned from their ordeal. As the days turned into weeks, Lucas and Max continued to rebuild their lives. Lucas made a conscious effort to be more present, picking Max up from school, attending his soccer games, and making time for the little things. He wanted Max to feel secure, loved, and confident. One day, as Lucas waited for Max to finish school, he received a call from Detective Ramirez. "Mr. Johnson," the detective began, his tone professional but kind. "I have some updates regarding Sarah." Lucas's pulse quickened. "Did you find her?" he asked, bracing himself for the news. "We found evidence that she's left the state," Ramirez explained. "She used a fake ID to board a bus heading west. We're coordinating with law enforcement in other states to try and track her down. But for now, it seems she's putting as much distance between herself and you as possible." Lucas felt a mixture of relief and lingering unease. "Thank you for letting me know," he said. "Do you think she'll try to come back?" "I can't say for sure," the detective admitted. "But I think it's unlikely. She knows we're aware of her identity and methods. She'll probably try to start fresh somewhere else." Lucas sighed, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "I hope you're right," he said. When Max got into the car, Lucas shared the news with him. "Detective Ramirez says Sarah has probably left the state," he told Max. "It looks like she's trying to run away and start over somewhere else." Max's eyes widened. "So, she's really gone?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. Lucas nodded. "It seems that way," he replied, "and that means we don't have to worry about her coming back." Max let out a sigh of relief. "That's good," he said. "I was scared she might come back and try to hurt us." Lucas reached over and ruffled Max's hair. "You don't have to be scared anymore, Max," he assured him. "We're safe, and we're going to keep moving forward." Max smiled. "I know, Dad," he said. "I feel a lot better now." As they drove home, Lucas couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. It had been a long, painful journey, but they were finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, but he also knew that he and Max could handle them, together. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lucas turned to Max with a smile. "You know what, Max?" he said. "What, Dad?" Max asked, looking up curiously. "I'm really proud of you," Lucas said sincerely. "You've been so strong through all of this, and I want you to know how much I love you." Max's eyes filled with emotion. "I love you too, Dad," he said. As they sat there, the orange and pink hues of the sunset painting the sky, both Lucas and Max felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the end of their story, but it was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, love, and the unbreakable bond they shared. Several months had passed since Lucas and Max learned that Sarah, also known as Clara, had likely fled the state. Though they still had moments of fear, those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. Max seemed to be adjusting well. He was doing better in school, making new friends, and laughing more often. Lucas felt hopeful that they were finally moving forward. One Friday afternoon, Max came home from school, his face glowing with excitement. "Dad, guess what?" he shouted as he dropped his backpack at the door. Lucas looked up from the kitchen counter where he was preparing dinner. "What is it, Max?" he asked, smiling at his son's enthusiasm. "I got picked for the school's talent show," Max announced proudly. "I'm going to do a magic act." Lucas felt a surge of pride. "That's amazing, Max," he said, walking over to give him a high five. "I didn't know you were into magic." Max nodded eagerly. "Yeah, I've been practicing some tricks with my friend Ben. He's really good at it, and he's been teaching me." Lucas's smile widened. "Well, I can't wait to see your performance," he said. "I know you're going to do great." Max's excitement was infectious, and over the next few days, he practiced his tricks tirelessly. He turned the living room into his personal stage, making objects disappear, pulling coins from behind Lucas's ear, and even trying to make the family cat levitate, though the cat didn't seem to appreciate the attempt. The night of the talent show finally arrived. Lucas made sure to arrive early, finding a good seat in the school auditorium where he could see Max clearly. He felt a mix of excitement and nerves, hoping Max wouldn't be too nervous in front of the crowd. As the show began, Lucas watched the other performances. There were singers, dancers, and even a few comedians. Then it was Max's turn. He stepped onto the stage wearing a small black cape and a top hat that was slightly too big for him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Max announced, his voice surprisingly steady, "I am Max the Magnificent, and today I will amaze you with my magical powers." The audience chuckled warmly, and Lucas felt a swell of pride. Max launched into his routine, pulling scarves from his sleeve, making a coin appear from thin air, and even performing a simple card trick that earned a round of applause. But just as Max was about to perform his final trick, making a small toy rabbit disappear from a hat, he suddenly froze. His face went pale, and his hands shook slightly. From his seat, Lucas could see Max's eyes scanning the crowd, his expression turning from excitement to fear. Lucas's heart sank. He knew that look. It was the same look Max had when he was scared but trying to stay brave. He followed Max's gaze and saw a woman standing near the back of the auditorium. She was tall, with long blonde hair. For a moment, Lucas's stomach clenched with fear. She looked just like Sarah. But then he looked closer. It wasn't her. The woman was a parent of one of Max's classmates, someone Lucas had seen before. He quickly realized that Max's fear had been triggered by a memory, not by reality. Lucas wanted to shout encouragement to Max, but he knew he couldn't interrupt the performance. Instead, he stood up slightly, giving Max a thumbs up and mouthing the words, "You got this." Max's eyes met his father's, and he took a deep breath. "Sorry, folks," he said to the audience, trying to recover his composure. Sometimes even magicians get a little nervous. The crowd chuckled again, and Max continued with his trick. He reached into the hat, pulled out a small stuffed rabbit, and then, with a flick of his wand, made it disappear into his cape. The audience clapped and cheered, and Max gave a small, relieved smile as he took a bow. Lucas stood up, clapping as hard as he could. He was filled with pride, not just because Max had completed his act, but because he had faced his fear head-on. After the show, Max ran over to Lucas, looking both happy and a little embarrassed. "Did you see that, Dad?" he asked. "I almost messed up." Lucas knelt down to Max's level, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did great, Max," he said earnestly. "You got nervous, but you kept going. That's what matters." Max's face brightened. "Thanks, Dad," he said. When I saw that woman, I thought it was Sarah. I know it wasn't, but I got scared for a minute." Lucas felt a pang of guilt, wishing he could erase all the fear Sarah had left behind. "It's okay to be scared, Max," he said gently. "What's important is that you didn't let it stop you. I'm really proud of you." Max nodded, looking more confident. "Thanks, Dad," he said again. "I'm glad you were there." The ride home was filled with laughter and talk about Max's performance. "Maybe I'll be a professional magician someday," Max joked, waving his imaginary wand. Lucas chuckled. "Well, you already made a lot of worries disappear tonight," he said. "That's some real magic." As they pulled into the driveway, Max's mood seemed lighter, as if the weight of his past fears had lifted a little. They spent the rest of the evening watching Max's favorite movie, eating popcorn, and enjoying each other's company. The next morning, Lucas found himself reflecting on how far they had come. Max's courage during the talent show was just one sign of his resilience. Lucas knew they still had a long road ahead, but seeing Max confront his fears made him feel hopeful. Later that day, Lucas received an unexpected call from Detective Ramirez. "Mr. Johnson," the detective began, "I have some news." Lucas's heart immediately raced. "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "We believe we've located Sarah," Ramirez continued. "She was spotted in a small town in Nevada. Local authorities are working to confirm her identity and, if it's her, to take her into custody." Lucas felt a surge of relief but also a twinge of anxiety. "Does this mean it's finally over?" he asked cautiously. "If it's really her and we can arrest her, it'll be a big step toward closure," Ramirez replied. "I'll keep you updated as soon as we know more." After hanging up, Lucas took a deep breath. He wasn't sure how to tell Max about the news, but he knew he couldn't keep it from him. "Max?" Lucas called, finding his son playing in the backyard. "Yeah, Dad," Max replied, looking up. "I just got a call from Detective Ramirez," Lucas said. "They think they've found Sarah in Nevada. The police are trying to arrest her." Max's eyes widened. "Really? Is she going to jail?" Lucas nodded. "If it's really her, then yes, she will be arrested." Max was quiet for a moment, processing the information. "Do you think she'll try to come back here?" Lucas shook his head. "I don't think so, Max," he reassured him. "But even if she did, the police would be ready. We're much safer now, and we have a lot of people looking out for us." Max seemed to relax a little. "I'm glad," he said simply. "I just want us to be okay." "We are okay," Lucas replied firmly. "No matter what happens, we're together, and that's what matters most." Max smiled, his eyes full of trust. "I know, Dad," he said. That evening, as they sat together watching TV, Lucas couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. It wasn't just about the possibility of Sarah being caught. It was about the strength he saw in Max, the way his son had grown and learned to face his fears. As the show played on, Max leaned against Lucas's side. "Dad," he said softly, "I think we're going to be just fine." Lucas wrapped his arm around Max's shoulders, feeling a deep sense of love and pride. "We are, Max," he agreed. "We really are." Days passed, and the tension around Sarah's possible capture lingered in Lucas and Max's home. Every time the phone rang, Lucas felt a jolt of anxiety, wondering if it was Detective Ramirez with news. Max, too, seemed on edge, though he tried to hide it. He focused on schoolwork, soccer practice, and his newfound passion for magic tricks. But Lucas could see that the uncertainty was wearing on him. One chilly evening, as Lucas was making dinner, the phone rang. He picked it up quickly, hoping for good news. "Mr. Johnson?" Detective Ramirez's familiar voice came through the line. "Yes, Detective," Lucas replied, bracing himself. "I wanted to let you know that we've confirmed it was Sarah in Nevada," Ramirez said. "She's been arrested and is in police custody." Lucas felt a wave of relief wash over him. "So it's really over?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. "It's mostly over," the detective answered. "She'll face charges for fraud, attempted insurance scam, and conspiracy. But there's one more thing. She has requested to speak with you before the trial begins." Lucas was taken aback. "She wants to talk to me? Why?" he asked, feeling a mix of confusion and unease. "I don't know, Mr. Johnson," Ramirez admitted, "but it's your choice whether to see her. You're not obligated to do so." Lucas paused, unsure of what to do. Part of him wanted to hear what Sarah had to say, to understand why she had done all those terrible things. But another part of him wanted nothing more than to leave the past behind and focus on his and Max's future. "I'll think about it," Lucas finally said. "I just need some time." "Of course," Ramirez replied. "Just let us know your decision when you're ready." After hanging up, Lucas sat down at the kitchen table, his mind racing. He knew he needed to tell Max about Sarah's arrest, but he wasn't sure how much detail to share. A few minutes later, Max came into the kitchen, his eyes curious. "Who was on the phone, Dad?" he asked. "It was Detective Ramirez," Lucas said, trying to keep his tone calm. "They've arrested Sarah. She's in jail now." Max's eyes widened with a mix of surprise and relief. "So she's not coming back here?" he asked. "No, she's not coming back," Lucas assured him. "But there's something else I need to tell you." Max looked worried. "What is it?" Lucas took a deep breath. "Sarah wants to talk to me before the trial. I don't know why, but she asked to see me." Max's face fell. "Are you going to see her, Dad?" "I'm not sure yet," Lucas admitted. "Part of me wants to hear what she has to say, but another part of me thinks it might be better to just move on." Max thought for a moment, then spoke softly. "If it were me, I'd want to know why she did it. But I'd also be scared to see her again." Lucas reached over and ruffled Max's hair. "I appreciate your honesty, Max," he said. "I'm still deciding, but I promise I'll make the choice that's best for both of us." Max nodded, seeming to accept his father's response. "Okay, Dad," he said. "I trust you." The following days were filled with quiet contemplation for Lucas. He talked to friends, family, and even a therapist, trying to make sense of whether meeting Sarah was the right decision. He wanted closure, but he also feared reopening old wounds. Finally, after days of thinking, Lucas made his choice. He would see Sarah, not for her sake, but for his own. He needed to face her one last time to find the closure he needed. He called Detective Ramirez to arrange the meeting. "I'm ready to see her," Lucas said firmly. A few days later, Lucas found himself standing outside the small interview room at the police station. The room was stark, with a metal table and 2 chairs. His heart pounded in his chest, and he could feel the weight of what was about to happen. He took a deep breath before stepping inside. When he entered the room, he saw Sarah sitting across the table. Her appearance was different, no longer polished and put together. Her hair was messy, and she looked tired, even broken. "Hello, Lucas," she said quietly, her voice lacking its usual charm. Lucas sat down, feeling a strange mix of anger and pity. "Why did you want to see me, Sarah?" he asked bluntly. Sarah looked down at her hands, as if gathering her thoughts. "I know I hurt you," she began slowly. "I know I hurt Max too. I needed to explain." "Explain what?" Lucas asked, his voice sharp. "How you lied to us? How you planned to hurt me for money?" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but Lucas wasn't sure if they were genuine. "I know it sounds hollow," she said, "but I never intended to actually go through with it. I didn't plan to hurt you or Max." Lucas felt a surge of anger. "But you still made the plan," he shot back. "You still deceived me, pretended to care about Max, and tried to destroy our lives." Sarah wiped away a tear, her voice shaky. "I was desperate, Lucas. I've been running scams for years because it's the only thing I know how to do. But when I met you, I started to feel something real. That's why I hesitated." Lucas stared at her, unsure whether to believe her words. You had plenty of chances to stop, he said coldly. But you didn't. I know, Sarah admitted, her head bowed. And I have to live with that. Lucas felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He had come seeking answers, but he wasn't sure he had found any that truly mattered. I came here to get closure, he said finally. Not to forgive you, but to understand. Sarah looked up, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of regret and defeat. I wish things had been different, she said softly. Lucas stood up, feeling a sense of finality. It's too late for that, Sarah, he said firmly. I need to focus on Max and our future. Goodbye. Without another word, Lucas left the room, closing the door behind him. He felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The conversation hadn't given him all the answers, but it had given him one thing, a sense of closure. When Lucas got home, Max was waiting for him on the porch. How did it go, Dad? He asked, his voice filled with concern. It's over, Lucas said simply. I talked to her, but nothing's going to change what happened. What matters now is us, our life, our future. Max seemed to understand, his expression softening. I'm glad you went, Dad, he said. Maybe now we can really move on. Lucas nodded, pulling Max into a hug. Yes, Max, he said, his voice steady. We can move on, together. That evening they decided to celebrate by making Max's favorite dinner, spaghetti with extra cheese. They laughed, cooked, and enjoyed each other's company, knowing that they had finally closed the chapter that had haunted them for so long. As they sat down to eat, Max looked at his father and smiled. You know what, Dad? He said. What's that, Max? Lucas asked. I think we're going to be okay, Max replied confidently. Lucas's eyes softened, filled with love and pride. I think so too, Max, he agreed. And for the first time in a long while, both Lucas and Max felt a true sense of peace. They knew that the road ahead might still have challenges, but they were ready to face them, together, stronger than ever before. With Sarah now behind bars and the trial set to begin, Lucas and Max felt a renewed sense of safety. The days seemed brighter, and laughter was slowly becoming a regular part of their home again. While they both knew that the past could not be erased, it no longer held the same power over them. One Saturday morning, Lucas and Max were enjoying a quiet breakfast. The sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow across the table. Dad, Max said suddenly, looking up from his bowl of cereal. Can we take a trip somewhere, just you and me? Lucas was surprised by the request. A trip? Where do you want to go, Max? He asked. I don't know, Max admitted. Maybe somewhere fun, like the beach or a cabin in the woods. Lucas thought for a moment, realizing how much they both needed a break from the past year's events. You know what, Max? He said with a smile. That sounds like a great idea. How about we go camping in the mountains? Just you, me, and nature. Max's eyes lit up with excitement. Really? We could go hiking, roast marshmallows, and maybe even see some wild animals. Exactly, Lucas agreed. We can leave next weekend, and I'll take care of all the planning. It'll be our little adventure. The following days were filled with preparations for the trip. Lucas dusted off the old camping gear, packed their bags, and stocked up on snacks. Max was thrilled, eagerly counting down the days until they could escape to the mountains. Finally, the day arrived. As Lucas and Max drove up the winding mountain road, they both felt a sense of freedom. The air was fresh, the trees were tall and green, and the worries of the past seemed to fade with each mile. Look, Dad! Max exclaimed, pointing out the window. There's a deer over there! Lucas slowed down, smiling as they watched the deer graze by the side of the road. It's beautiful, isn't it? He said. Max nodded, his face filled with awe. I think this is going to be the best trip ever, he declared. They reached the campsite by late afternoon, setting up their tent under a canopy of trees. The sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling in the wind created a calming atmosphere. Max ran around, gathering sticks for the campfire, while Lucas unpacked their gear. As evening approached, they sat by the fire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. Do you remember the last time we went camping? Lucas asked, poking the fire with a stick. Max nodded, smiling. Yeah, it was with Mom. She taught me how to make the perfect s'more. Lucas felt a pang of sadness at the memory, but also a sense of gratitude. She'd be proud of you, Max, he said softly. You've grown into such a brave, strong kid. Max looked up, his eyes shining with pride. Thanks, Dad, he said. I think she'd be proud of you too. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Max leaned back, staring up at the stars. Do you think she can see us from up there? He asked quietly. Lucas nodded. I like to believe she can, he replied. And I think she's happy knowing we're okay. Max seemed comforted by the thought. I think so too, he said. The next day they set out on a long hike through the woods. Max was full of energy, running ahead to explore the trail while Lucas followed at a more leisurely pace. Be careful, Max, Lucas called, smiling as he watched his son's excitement. I will, Dad, Max shouted back, waving his arms enthusiastically. As they hiked deeper into the woods, they stumbled upon a small, clear stream. Can we stop here, Dad? Max asked, looking eager to dip his feet in the water. Sure, Lucas agreed. Let's take a break and have some snacks. They sat by the water, dipping their toes into the cool stream. Max looked content, enjoying the peaceful surroundings. I wish we could stay here forever, he said dreamily. Lucas laughed. It's tempting, isn't it? He agreed. But I think we'd miss home after a while. Max nodded thoughtfully. Yeah, I guess you're right, but it's nice to get away for a little while. It really is, Lucas agreed, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. I think we both needed this. That evening, as they sat around the campfire once more, Max asked a question that had been on his mind. Dad, do you think you'll ever want to date someone again? The question caught Lucas off guard. I don't know, Max, he admitted honestly. It's not something I'm thinking about right now. I'm just focused on being the best dad I can be for you. Max seemed to consider this. I just want you to be happy, he said quietly. You deserve it. Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. Thank you, Max, he said, his voice filled with emotion. I want you to be happy too, and right now, spending time with you is what makes me the happiest. Max smiled, looking relieved. Me too, Dad, he said. They sat together, watching the flames flicker and the stars twinkle above. It was a simple, peaceful moment, but it felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, healing, and the unbreakable bond between father and son. The next morning, they packed up the campsite, ready to head back home. As they drove down the mountain, Lucas glanced at Max, who was looking out the window with a content expression. Did you have fun, buddy? He asked. Max turned to his father, grinning widely. I had the best time, Dad, he said. Can we do this again soon? Lucas nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Absolutely, he said. Whenever you want. When they arrived back home, it felt different, more like a place of warmth and comfort than it had in a long time. Max immediately ran to his room to unpack, while Lucas stood in the living room, taking in the familiar surroundings. Home sweet home, he said to himself with a smile. Max soon returned carrying a small photo album. Dad, can we look at this together? He asked. Lucas recognized the album. It was full of pictures from their old family trips. Of course, he said, sitting down on the couch with Max. As they flipped through the pages, they laughed at the memories. Max's first trip to the zoo, a messy ice cream disaster on the beach, and a Christmas morning filled with joy. Those were good times, Max said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. They really were, Lucas agreed. And there will be many more good times ahead, I promise. Max nodded, his face brightening. I believe you, Dad, he said. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Max gave Lucas a hug. I love you, Dad, he said softly. I love you too, Max, Lucas replied, feeling a wave of love and gratitude. More than you'll ever know. As Lucas turned off the lights and settled into bed, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The road had been long and filled with unexpected turns, but he and Max had come out stronger, together. And as they drifted off to sleep, father and son knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side, with love, courage, and the unbreakable bond that would always keep them together. Max's courage to speak up and reveal the truth not only protected his father, but also changed their lives forever. This young boy showed us that bravery isn't about size or age. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. In the end, Max's love for his father and his commitment to honesty overcame fear, bringing them closer than ever. This story reminds us that sometimes the most heroic acts come from the smallest voices. It's a powerful example of how standing up for the truth can make a difference, no matter how young you are. If Max's story inspired you, take a moment to think. Have you ever had to make a tough decision to protect someone you love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories of courage and honesty. And remember, you never know who might need to hear this message. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that warm the heart and inspire the soul. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.